You'd think a Viking's day began with a sword in hand and a raid on the horizon. But I'm your bedtime historian, and today you'll wake in a smoke-stained longhouse beside a grumpy uncle and a half-frozen goat. No battles, no glory. Just frostbitten toes and stale fish breath. Welcome home. Your bed is little more than a straw-stuffed sack nestled near the hearth. The air smells of pine smoke sweat and something vaguely sour, possibly the cheese, possibly your cousin. You pull your woolen cloak tighter as your breath clouds the dim air. Somewhere in the shadows, someone coughs. The fire pops softly. This isn't the Viking saga you expected. It's quieter, warmer, and somehow smellier. If the thought of Viking chores sounds cozier than modern deadlines, go ahead and tap, like, and subscribe. It won't summon Odin, but it might bring you a few more sleepy sagas. And if you're the kind of person who measures time in centuries instead of hours, what era are you whispering from tonight? Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You rise slowly, careful not to disturb your snoring father. He mumbles something about goats in his sleep. It's still dark, but others are stirring. Your mother pokes at the hearth with an iron rod coaxing coals to glow. You crawl from under the woolen heap you share with two siblings and step onto packed dirt cold enough to wake your ancestors. Your toes curl instinctively. The longhouse is one room, one family, and about 6 too many smells. There are no rooms, only rhythms. You move by feel around the bed frame your grandfather built, past the carved post that holds your mother's cooking tools, to the bench where your older brother is already tying on his leg wraps. He grunts. That's good morning Viking style. The air is thick with smoke from the hearth, the only real heat in the building. Its glow flickers across beams darkened with decades of soot. A chicken clucks underfoot. Someone sneezes. Somewhere a baby starts crying. The noise level rises with the sun, or rather with the people who move before it. Outside frost webs the earth. You can just make out the curved silhouette of the longhouse roof hunched against the cold, like an old warrior at rest. But inside, it's not war that greets you. It's dough. Your mother kneads barley flour into a stiff slab, her hands red from the chill. She presses it onto a flat stone near the fire. The scent of baking earthy, faintly sour, mixes with smoke. Your job, as always, is to tend the fire while she mutters instructions you already know. The iron poker is warm in your grip, a welcome contrast to the icy morning air. You stretch slowly. Limbs crack like kindling. There's no morning calisthenics, no roaring chants, just a quiet ache in your shoulders from yesterday's hoeing. The closest thing to a battle cry is your aunt yelling at your cousin to move the chamber pot. Again. Historical records describe Viking longhouses as smoke-filled, communal, and deeply practical, heated by central hearths, and packed with people, animals, and provisions. Archaeologists have unearthed charred beams and soot layers that confirm how ever-present smoke was. In some reconstructions, the rafters were so blackened you could smear soot with your finger. There's debate about how Vikings navigated this smoky world. Some suggest open smoke holes. Others believe the smoke simply filtered through the thatch. Either way, mornings began with the same mix of smoke breath and bread. You sit down beside the fire watching the dough rise just enough to blister. Your stomach growls. Someone laughs. It might be a long day, but for now, you're just warm enough, just full enough, and just far enough from the expectations of saga scribes to remain blissfully ordinary. You step outside and instantly regret it. The bucket is cold, the water is colder, and privacy. That's a luxury for monks and nobles. Here behind the longhouse, you squat near the chopping block, scrubbing yesterday's grime from your face, while a chicken watches like it's judging your technique. Your sister walks by, Humming your brother complains about the smell of old fish, and your mother reminds you loudly not to forget under your arms this time. Even washing is a group activity. Your wool tunic itches against damp skin. You splash another handful of freezing water across your neck and try to pretend your toes aren't going numb. Your garments, two, maybe three if you're lucky, are rotated sparingly beaten against flat stones in the stream on warmer days. Today, it's too cold for that luxury. Today you rub the worst of the sweat and soil from your underclothes with rough lye-soaked hands and hang them near the smoke hole to dry. Well, smoke, really. Hygiene in Viking life wasn't non-existent, but it was pragmatic. Combs made of bone or antler were found in nearly every Viking grave, a sign that grooming mattered. So did tweezers, ear picks, and soap, lye-based, harsh but effective. Some even used ashes in their hair to absorb oil, a Viking twist on dry shampoo. But cleanliness was a spectrum, not a rule. Your hair smells like wood smoke and sheep. You rake a carved comb through it, wincing as it hits a knot. Your older cousin, ever the expert on nothing, claims warriors rubbed bear fat into their beards before battle. You suspect he just likes the smell. Scholars continue to debate how clean Viking farmers truly were. Saga literature tends to romanticize, while archaeological finds suggest a mix of habits. Careful grooming, tools, yes, but also parasites and dirt-caked textiles. Some argue cleanliness was a social marker. Merchants and raiders cleaned up when appearances mattered. Farmers. Not so much. You dry your hands on a shared linen towel, stiff, crusty, and vaguely wet no matter when you use it. It smells faintly of sour milk. The towel has been hanging by the door all winter. No one remembers when it was last washed. No one dares suggest it. As you finish, your youngest sibling, just 4 winters old, darts out with no trousers, shrieking into the frost like a wild squirrel. Your mother sighs. Your father inside grumbles about the cost of firewood. The cows low in the distance signaling their own kind of impatience. You pull your tunic over your head and stomp your feet to bring some life back to them. The morning light is gray and slow, dragging itself across the sky, like it too wants to go back to sleep. There's no urgency in the chores ahead, just constancy, like the cold, like the goats, like the smell of unwashed wool. A new day has started, and you're officially cleaner than you were, if only just. The chickens seem unconvinced. The kitchen shrine is tucked into the darkest corner, halfway between the fire pit and the door where the cold sneaks in. A carved figure, half-man-half tangle of knots and time-worn driftwood, stands on a little shelf above the grain jar. You've seen it every day of your life, and still there's something about its lopsided eyes that makes you pause. You take a small pinch of butter from the wooden dish and smear it across the idol's mouth. Not much, just enough to shine its lips. A quiet offering. Not because you expect Thor to bless the barley harvest himself, but because, well, you always have. Your grandmother did, her grandmother before her, and nobody ever dared stop. The idol's name shifts depending on who you ask. Your father insists it's Freyr, god of fertility and good weather. Your cousin says it's a household spirit who once helped great-grandfather avoid a wolf. Your mother just calls it him with the same reverence she uses for guests and thunderstorms. Morning offerings are simple butter, a few grains, sometimes the last shred of cheese rind. Nothing grand, just gestures given in quiet routine. You whisper a thank you, or maybe a please, unclear which, and wipe your fingers on your tunic hem. Viking spirituality lived in this space between necessity and habit. The great sagas mention sacrifices and visions, but most households practiced in smaller ways. A god on the mantle, a whisper to the wind. Historians still argue whether these acts were true belief or just inherited ritual. Was it faith, or just a way to feel less alone in the dark? There are no candles, just the hearthlight flickering against the wood. The idol gleams faintly. Outside, a raven calls, once, twice, then falls silent. You've heard the elders say, ravens bring messages. You've also seen them steal bread when your back is turned. Interpretations vary. Your grandmother believes the gods hear better on foggy mornings. Your uncle insists the gods don't care about butter. He says the only thing keeping the longhouse upright is timber and stubbornness. But you've seen him tip ale to the dirt before planting season, so his opinion wobbles like the old stool by the door. After your offering, you return to the hearth, where your mother is flipping the barley flatbread with an iron spatula. She glances at you, then at the idol. Her nod is tiny, but it carries weight. You've done your part. The house has been fed. Religious scholars today continue to puzzle over Viking domestic rituals. Unlike grand temples or organized churches, much of Norse worship occurred in homes' hillsides and boats. The lack of written liturgy leaves room for debate, were these household shrines sacred spaces or just cozy superstitions. Either way, the figure above your grain jar seems satisfied. Or maybe that's just the butter. You grab a trencher ready to catch whatever meal comes next. The idol stays behind watching, or at least pretending to. The trencher hits the table with a soft thunk, and the room hums to life. Breakfast isn't glamorous, but it's hot, and that counts for a lot. A slab of barley bread still warm from the hearth, a strip of smoked fish so thin it curls at the edge, and a wedge of goat cheese so sharp it might count as a weapon in some households. You eat with your fingers quick, methodical bites, because if you dawdle, someone else will swipe the better piece. There's no table in the longhouse, just low benches and knees that double as surfaces. The food is shared, passed around with silent nods or sharp elbows. Someone's always getting more cheese than they should. This morning, it's your aunt who insists she's eating for her bones. No one argues, mostly because she once bit a man for reaching over her plate. A toddler smears fish oil on his sleeve. Your brother sneezes into the breadbasket. Someone drops a wooden spoon and curses softly. The goat cheese crumbles just right, chalky and strong. You chew quickly, savoring what little there is to savor. Viking breakfasts weren't feasts, they were fuel. Archaeological evidence from preserved latrines and midden heaps shows a diet dominated by barley rye oats, and whatever fish didn't escape. Herring was a staple. So was sour milk stored in hide bags or wooden vats that made your nose twitch just to think about them. Some historians suggest meat was rare in morning meals, reserved more for feasts or later in the day, though accounts vary widely by region and season. You expect epic portions, perhaps a boar's leg or mead-drenched porridge. What you get is a chewy strip of smoked fish and half a boiled turnip. It's not heroic, but it fills the belly. There's little talking at breakfast. Everyone's half awake, half frozen, and half annoyed about whatever chore they're about to be assigned. You listen to the scrape of spoons, the rustle of linen, and the occasional muttered reminder, don't forget to patch the thatch, check the traps, milk the grumpiest goat last. Somewhere in the corner, your cousin is already retying his leg wraps, eager to beat the frost to the flax field. Or maybe he just wants first pick of the best hoe. Tools have hierarchy like everything else. You pass the trencher to your sister, who grins with fish between her teeth. It's not a glamorous life, but there's a rhythm to it. And in the rhythm, a kind of peace. Historians continue to debate just how diverse the Viking diet was across classes and seasons. Some argue that inland families had fewer fish and more dairy, while coastal dwellers subsisted on dried cod and kelp. Others note discrepancies in burial diets and dental wear, suggesting that what you ate also said something about who you were. But this morning, you were simply someone with bread in your hand and chores on the horizon. The flatbread crumbles. The fish is gone. The warmth in your belly fades fast, but not as fast as the daylight will. The sword you dream of hangs above the hearth untouched. Instead, you hoist a hoe. Out in the field, the frost clings stubbornly to the soil. You break it apart with steady swings, your breath puffing in clouds as turnips wait beneath the surface like sleepy treasure. Beside you, your cousin mutters about flax rot. Behind you, your uncle sings a farming chant no one remembers the words to, but everyone hums along. There is no battle here, just roots and rhythm. You stab the hoe into the dirt, flip a clump, pat it down. Repeat. The tool is wood-handled, iron-capped, worn smooth, where generations have gripped it before you. There's a notch on the handle from your grandfather's hand, or maybe his grandfather's. It's hard to tell where one life ends and another's chore begins. Viking agriculture wasn't glamorous, but it was the backbone of society. Despite the saga-driven image of warriors and longboats, most Vikings were farmers. They raised barley, rye, and oats. They tended cabbage leeks and turnips. Their tools, simple plows, hoes, and sickles, were effective and enduring. Some scholars argue these everyday items reveal more about Viking ingenuity than any ornate sword ever could. Your hoe squeaks against a hidden stone. You shift your weight, groaning quietly. Beside you, your mother is already inspecting the flax bed, muttering about mold. She works faster than anyone, sleeves rolled, skirt tucked. You try to keep up. Fields stretch in uneven patches across the ridge, dotted with rows of stones that mark boundaries. Fences are woven from saplings and stubbornness. Birds swoop down for worms, and somewhere a sheep escapes through a hole in the brush, bleating its tiny rebellion. Farming is a family affair. Even the little ones carry baskets or scatter seed. The older folks supervise with pointed sticks and sharper looks. Every hand has a role, every back a burden. There's no heroic music for pulling weeds, but you hum anyway, something your grandmother taught you about a man who wooed his wife by growing the tallest leek. She said he was the most desirable man in the village. You still don't know if she was joking. Researchers continue to debate how central farming truly was to Viking identity. While trade and raiding filled the sagas, excavation sites show clear patterns of crop rotation, long-term grain storage, and soil amendments that hint at deep agricultural knowledge. Some argue the saga authors simply found farming too ordinary to write about. But the earth kept families alive long after the raiders were gone. You straighten, stretching your back, eyeing the sky for cloud signs. There's work left to do always, but the row is done. For now. Your cousin jokes that you missed a turnip. You throw a clod of dirt at him. It lands in his hood. Balance restored. The fields may not sing songs of glory, but they remember your footsteps. And in the end, you eat what you sow, not what you boast. The hoe clinks into the soil once more, right on cue. The grown-ups are busy breaking their backs. The children breaking sticks. Beyond the fields near the edge of the village, the youngest Vikings wage their own quiet battles. Two boys duel with carved wooden swords, one of which was definitely a soup ladle this morning. A girl carries a lamb bone like it's a war hammer, her shield. A bent lid from a stew pot. No one minds. It's training, or at least that's what they claim when caught. You pause near the fence watching them. They've built a fortress out of hay bales and broken crates complete with a moat of chicken feathers. It's impressive in a deeply unstable sort of way. The youngest boy guards the gate with a stick longer than he is tall. He demands a password. You offer him a pickled herring. He lets you pass. Play was different back then, rougher certainly, but not absent. Archaeological digs in Scandinavian sites have unearthed toys made from bone wood and stone. Small carved animals, dice etched with runes, even little ships. While not many survive, they whisper of afternoons spent not in war, but in make-believe. Some scholars suggest Viking children mimicked adult tasks as play mock farming, pretend weaving even mini trade negotiations. You sit on a stump and watch as one girl negotiates a peace treaty involving 2 pebbles of feather and half a roasted beet. It fails immediately. War resumes. A carved doll rests nearby, its painted eyes half faded. Someone's prized companion, probably. Its dress is stitched from leftover flax cloth, its hands smudged with ash. You pick it up gently. It smells faintly of goat and hearth smoke, like everything. There's laughter, the high-pitched kind that only comes from winning a battle that doesn't matter. Someone tries to launch a sheep pellet with a slingshot. It backfires. Another boy clutches his forehead now, adorned with ancient sheep dung. He howls. The others collapse in a pile of giggles. Researchers continue to question how much childhood Viking kids truly experienced. With life expectancies lower and adult responsibilities beginning early, some argue that play was brief and rare. Others suggest children found time between chores, especially in long summer days or fire-lit winters. There's no consensus, just a scattering of carved evidence and whispered hints in old texts. Back near the hay fort, a mock raid is underway. Someone steals a doll, prompting a chase across the turnip rows. Your cousin, pretending to be a wounded warrior, rolls dramatically down the hill, clutching his stomach and howling that he's been treasoned. No one corrects his grammar. The goats seem mildly alarmed. You remember when you did the same charge imaginary enemies named Styx after mythical swords wept over a cracked toy horse. It feels like yesterday. It feels like 100 winters ago. Eventually, someone calls the children back. A mother's voice, stern but tired. They scatter, still laughing, trailing feathers and bragging. The fort stands empty. For now. The wind shifts. You rise, brushing hay from your sleeves. The world of chores waits, but so does the memory of laughter made from nothing but sticks and bones. The wool is soft, the knee is scraped, and your grandmother is in charge of both. You step into the longhouse just as she's tying a strip of linen around your younger brother's shin. He snivels dramatically. She tisks, softly blows on the wound once, and pats his hair. Nearby, her spindle spins like a spider's leg, rhythmically twisting wool into thread while her foot taps time against the floorboards. She never truly stops working, just changes tasks mid-motion. Clumsy as your father, she says not unkindly. Then to you, hand me the comfrey. You do. The shelf above her loom is a garden, and miniature bundles of dried herbs hang from the rafters, their scents mingling in strange harmony. Sage, nettle, yarrow, and something you only know as burn leaf used for burns, of course. She crushes one leaf between her fingers, sniffs, nods, then tucks it beneath the bandage like a charm. Viking women weren't passive bystanders in domestic life. They were dynamos. Responsible not only for spinning and weaving, but for healing, preserving, brewing, and trading. Textile work alone was monumental. Linen and wool were essential currencies, traded, gifted, stored. Some women even signed their names into woven patterns, a quiet form of authorship stitched in wool. Your grandmother's hands are calloused and clever. She threads the spindle with practiced grace, never pausing her story about the time a horse kicked your uncle into a mud barrel. Her loom creaks behind her, tall as a man, its weights dangling like stone teeth. You pass her a new bobbin, and she rewards you with a candied nut from her apron. Some historians argue that Viking homes were more matriarchal than traditionally believed. Burial goods and legal codes suggest women held land-managed trade and sometimes oversaw family justice. Others caution against over-romanticizing. Most power still funneled through male lines. But in the rhythm of the household, women's influence was absolute. Your mother walks by, drops a sack of carded wool on the floor, mutters about goat hair in the spinning pile, and disappears again. Your grandmother sighs like this happens daily. It does. You glance at the wound. Already your brother is poking it. She slaps his hand away without looking. "Let it scab," she says. And no scratching. There's a comfort here, the quiet weave of care and routine. Even the cats, 2 of them curled beneath the loom, seem soothed by the soft clack of wood and wool. The smell of herbs warm from the fire wraps the space like a blanket. She begins a new story, something about a neighbor who tried to dye her cloak with beet juice and ended up looking like a berry tart. You laugh. Your brother, miraculously healed, joins in. Outside, a breeze rattles the smoke hole cover. The fire pops. The spindle spins. The longhouse breathes. There are no runes carved for scraped knees or wool threads, but maybe there should be. Your grandmother hums a tune older than your name. Even midday can feel like a pause button pressed halfway. The chores ease, just a little. The sun has climbed, but not high, never high this time of year. Its light slants low through the longhouse slats, picking out dust motes and chicken fluff floating in the air like lazy spirits. You find a seat near the hearth, where the big pot simmers with something grayish and bubbling, gruel again. You try not to sigh too audibly. Your mother stirs the pot with slow, deliberate circles. Occasionally, she taps the spoon twice on the edge, a rhythm she claims wards off clumps. No one questions this. At her feet, your aunt is shelling peas and making commentary on everyone's love lives. Loudly. Jorun dreamt of 3 ravens last night, she announces. That means a wedding, or a betrayal, or toothaches. Your older cousin groans. Midday isn't rest exactly. It's gossip cloaked in utility. While gruel cook's neighbors wander over just to check if you've got turnips left. They leave with news opinions and sometimes turnips. An old man leans on the doorframe with a wheeze and announces that someone's goat wandered too far upriver. Again. A girl peeks in to say her uncle dreamt of fire and geese, which clearly means trouble. Everyone murmurs. Someone passes bread. Communication in Viking communities was oral layered and wildly interpretive. Without written records for daily events, news traveled via stories, dreams, jokes, complaints, and warnings blurred together. Scholars suggest these midday gossip breaks functioned as informal politics, a way to maintain social bonds, share intelligence, and establish pecking orders. Or maybe people were just nosy. Either theory works. You sip from a wooden cup of weak ale and listen. Someone's cart broke an axle. A pig gave birth to 5 piglets. One-eyed Leaf from the coast swears he saw an elf in the fog, but he also drinks too much seaweed brew, so mixed credibility. Then come the dreams. Aunt Dagny speaks of owls circling the well bad luck. Your mother rolls her eyes, but glances at the window anyway. A boy recounts a sleep vision of a tree split in half, with a red snake curling from its base. Symbol of harvest, someone suggests. Symbol of indigestion, says your grandmother from the corner, not looking up from her weaving. The gruel is served thin gray, slightly gritty. A few strips of dried leek float in it, like pale confetti. You eat it anyway. Hunger is persuasive. Across from you, a girl picks the good bits from her bowl and whispers that she plans to run off to Hedeby, where they say the streets are made of fish and linen. Her sister snorts, spraying barley from her nose. No one tells her she can't go. No one tells her she can. Historians still debate how much of Viking society was dictated by such conversations. Was gossip a form of governance or just background noise? It's hard to say. But alliances rose, reputations shifted, and courtships bloomed over steaming bowls of gruel. You scrape the last bit from your bowl and lean back, warmed and drowsy. Outside, the goats are planning something. There's no bell to toll the hour, but when the goats escape, you know it's midday for certain. It starts with a faint clatter, then bleating, then a chorus of increasingly frantic shouts. Get the rope. Not that rope, why is she on the roof? You sigh and grab a handful of clover. The goat pen was secure this morning. It was. You checked. But goats are agents of chaos fueled by spite and an unholy talent for escape artistry. Now they're halfway to the flax beds, one perched atop a barrel like a triumphant mountain spirit. Another has wedged herself into the kindling pile. You don't ask how. You just approach slowly, clover outstretched like a peace offering. Livestock was a cornerstone of Viking economy, more than ships, more than swords. Goats, sheep, pigs, cows, and the occasional disgruntled goose made up a family's true wealth. They gave milk meat, hides, wool, and apparently migraines. Managing them was a daily test of patience and leg strength. You coo softly to the goat on the barrel. She eyes the clover. You step closer. She licks her lips. Just when you think victory is within reach, she leaps over your head, past your cousin, and directly into the vegetable patch. Your uncle curses so creatively, the nearby chickens freeze. Chasing goats involves strategy. You loop a rope into a noose, bait it with cheese rind, and mutter prayers to whichever deity specializes in small, nimble livestock. Others join in your sister with a bucket, your cousin with a rake, your grandmother wielding a broom like a battle axe. Eventually, through luck and humiliation, the goats are corralled. Again. You tie the gate shut, then tie it again, for good measure. One goat stares at you through the slats, chewing slowly. Judging. Historical records show Viking livestock management was both vital and exhausting. Cows were often tethered in longhouses during the coldest months. Pigs roamed freely, rooting up whatever they pleased. Goats, always goats, were known for their independence and their habit of climbing things they absolutely shouldn't. Some scholars question how efficient animal enclosures really were, given the constant references to escaped herds and damaged fences. Others argue that the chaos was simply normal. You haul water from the well, pouring it into the trough, while muttering your least favorite goat's name like a curse. The cows cluster around their warm breath, rising in clouds. You pat one affectionately on the nose. She sneezes in your face. Back at the house, your cousin is trying to remove a goat turd from his boot with a stick. He's gagging dramatically. You offer him your sleeve. He declines. You notice a break in the clouds, sunlight dappling the straw roof like gold flakes. The animals settle. For now. You sit on an overturned bucket, catching your breath, watching the goats pretend they were never wild. One nibbles at your sleeve. You let her. There's peace in the pen, tenuous bleeding peace. The loom sings, softly but persistently. Inside the longhouse is quieter again. The chaos of goats fades into the background hum of domestic rhythm. You step past a drying cloak and nearly trip over a basket of wool, narrowly avoiding a tangle of thread, so complex it might qualify as its own saga. The women are gathered in the central space now, 3 looms standing like wooden sentinels, their warp threads taut and whispering. Your mother threads a shuttle through with deft fingers, the motion hypnotic. Beside her, your aunt counts under her breath, eyes darting between pattern knots. And your grandmother, well, she just watches the sky through the smoke hole and mutters, "Too many crows today." Superstition is woven into every thread. The tapestries they make aren't just for warmth or trade. They tell stories, patterns echoing marriages, harvests, omens, even deaths. The colors speak to indigo for sorrow, russet for the hearth, golden saffron if you dare. And though no one says it outright, everyone notices when the black thread appears. You sit on a bench close enough to listen, not close enough to be assigned a task. One woman hums a tune about a woman who wove her husband's death into a blanket. Another counters with a joke about a man so boring even his ghost stopped haunting. Laughter ripples gently like a breeze across linen. In Viking homes, weaving was more than domestic labor. It was power. A woman who controlled cloth, controlled trade dowries, inheritance. Cloth was currency, yes, but also mythology. Norns, the fates of Norse belief, wove destinies at the edge of time. To weave was to shape the future. Historians still explore the layers of symbolism in Viking textiles. Some tapestries are thought to hold protective spells encoded in shape and stitch. Others argue that these readings are modern projections seeing sorcery where there was simply skill. But even skeptics admit Viking cloth held meaning far beyond warmth. You pluck a loose strand from your sleeve and wind it nervously around your finger. Outside, a crow lands on the roof beam. The women pause. Your mother squints. Third one today, she says, not liking it. Your grandmother spits lightly on the hearth and mutters something unprintable. It's probably protective or deeply insulting. Possibly both. Talk turns to dreams. Again, one woman says she dreamt of red fish swimming backward. Another saw her husband walking into the sea with his boots on the wrong feet. You're not sure what any of it means, but everyone seems to have an opinion. A baby cries, someone rocks the cradle with one foot never breaking rhythm on the loom. The pattern continues, thread over thread, life laid out in warp and weft. You breathe in the smell of wool smoke and faintly sweet turnip stew. Outside, the sky darkens just a touch. Nothing ominous. Just a reminder that daylight is not a forever thing. Your mother glances at you. You'll learn next year, she says, and you nod, even if you're not sure what exactly you're agreeing to. The crow caws once and flies off. Salt stings the air, and your cousin smells like fish. He's just come back from the coast. Boots still damp, arms heavy with trade goods wrapped in oilcloth. Not treasure exactly, just salt-dried herring, some seaweed, a chipped bead or two. Still, it draws a crowd. The younger children swarm him like he's a returning hero. He rolls his eyes and lets them poke at the fish. You join him on the bench. He grins, teeth stains slightly purple from some berry he probably shouldn't have eaten. Storm nearly tipped the boat, he says casually. We tied ourselves to the mast like fools. He unwraps the salt, a pale gray block the size of a fist. It glitters like frost and smells stronger than you expect. The sea is far but never out of mind. Teenagers like your cousin often apprenticed on small trade runs long before they ever saw combat. Raiding was rare for most. Coastal journeys to barter dried fish for iron or soapstone were more common. In fact, some young Vikings never touched a sword at all, just rope sailcloth and the occasional squashed cod. Historians argue about how eager Viking youth were to raid. Some claim the romanticism came later added by poets with a flair for gore. Others suggest a more complex truth, that for every boy dreaming of silver-laden monasteries, another feared the sea's dark moods, or the silence that followed a spear thrust. You hold the salt block in your hand. It's heavier than it looks sharp-edged. For the cheese, your cousin says. And the hides. Maybe butter if it hasn't gone sour. Trade was rarely glamorous, but it greased the wheels of survival. He pulls out a carved bone needle payment, perhaps, or barter. For your sister, he says. She's still doing that nettle embroidery. You nod. You remember your first trip to the coast, clinging to the rail of a boat so narrow it felt like a trick. You remember the slap of cold spray, the fish stink, the silence of older boys who stared into the horizon, like it owed them something. Now your cousin leans back, eyes closed. Might go north next time, he murmurs. They say there's glass in the trader's market up there, blue as sky. Your aunt walks by and touzles his hair, then immediately wipes her hand on her apron. Smells like he rolled in haddock, she says. No one disagrees. The children have moved on now, constructing a fish-scale tower beside the goat pen. The goats are unimpressed. Your cousin stretches bones, popping. Better than hoeing turnips, he says, and you can't argue. Still, you wonder if he misses the rhythm of home, the scent of straw, the creak of the loom, the endless stew. The sea gives, the sea takes. And sometimes it gives you a fish that stinks up the whole house. You hand him back the salt. He nods, the kind of thanks you don't need words for. Tomorrow he'll be cleaning nets. Tonight he gets to eat his share first. The sun is low now, dragging its golden skirts across the dirt as if reluctant to leave. You don't stop working exactly, you just shift the kind of busy you're doing. Twilight brings quieter tasks, hands still moving, but the rhythm softer. Your sister scrapes a hide clean of its last stubborn bits of flesh. Your father checks a fishing net for holes one eye squinting against the dusk. You find a brush and set to grooming the shaggy little horse you've known since it was a foal. She noses your pocket. You give her the last bite of a carrot you were saving. She wins. Someone is mending, someone is sharpening, someone is braiding string. All of it hums together like a lullaby sung by calloused hands. Your father begins a story, not with any preamble, just a sudden sentence that floats into the air like smoke. There was a bear once, he says, who took a whole sheep in its teeth and vanished into the snow. You glance up. This one again. It's a good one. Storytelling was the Viking world's entertainment education and emotional glue. By firelight and mealtime and tool work, tales passed through generations like hand-me-down cloaks. The stories weren't always accurate, but they were always true in their way. Scholars believe many of the great sagas began this way, a passing story about a bear, a storm, a lost ring, embroidered a little more with each retelling. Tonight's version of the sheep-stealing bear involves more snow than usual. And a ladder. Your father pauses often to make sure your cousin is paying attention. He is. Meanwhile, you finish brushing the horse, who is now gleaming like oiled wood. She swishes her tail and ambles off work, complete. You stretch hands sticky with bristles and old carrot. In the background, your uncle slices a bit of leather for a strap, humming an old song about a sailor who married a fish. No one questions it. It's not even the strangest one. As the tale winds down, your mother sits beside your father, her knitting needles clicking quietly. He wraps up the story with a dramatically whispered, "And the bear was never seen again." The children gasp. Your grandmother snorts. Historians still debate how literal these oral traditions were. Did they record history, allegory, entertainment? Probably all three. What's certain is that they endured, not because they were written, but because they were spoken, again and again, by firelight, with turnips, and always slightly exaggerated. You reach for the scrap of net your cousin was mending earlier. You run your fingers along the twine checking knots. They're good. Your father says a strong knot holds both fish and lies. Someone begins a new tale, this one, about a chicken who predicted a storm. You think it's a joke, but it starts with such gravity that you're unsure. That's the trick of a good Viking tale. It makes even the absurd feel ancient. The sky turns deeper blue. Somewhere in the trees a night bird calls. The tools are quieter now, but still moving. The stew simmers slow, and the words simmer slower. You gather around the pot again this time, with bowls instead of hopes. It's turnips again, of course it is. Some marrow bones too boiled long enough that the broth glistens faintly in the firelight. You settle between your father and your uncle. One smells like fish. The other smells like smoke and something less easily named. You think it might be regret. Dinner isn't rowdy. It's quiet, not solemn, just tired. The kind of silence that comes after a long day when everything still hurts, but you're too worn down to complain. Spoons clink softly. Somewhere, someone coughs. Your cousin picks a bone clean and sets it aside like an offering. The dog eyes it. The stew is hot and salty and oddly comforting. You chew slowly. Across the hearth, your uncle stares into the flames like they owe him an explanation. He hasn't spoken much since he returned. You remember he used to laugh more, before he left, before the raids, before the silence. Some family members raided, others didn't. Some left and came back. Others just left. There's no rule about it, no shame, no celebration, just a shadow that follows certain names in the family. You've heard snippets of stories. enough to guess at what's left unsaid. Viking society revered warriors, yes, but it also depended on those who stayed behind. Farmers, fishers, makers of rope and cheese, and children. Some scholars argue the division wasn't so sharp, that raiders were often also fathers, weavers, planners of fields. Others claim the lines were clearer. That to stay was safer, duller, but necessary. You wonder if your uncle misses the sea, or if he dreams of not remembering it. He stirs his bowl, slowly, eyes distant. Then suddenly he speaks. The quiet here. It's heavier. No one answers, but everyone hears. You offer him more stew. He declines. Your mother asks if the goat stayed penned this time. Your cousin grins and lies. The conversation picks up gently about practical things. When to dig the root cellar deeper. Whether the linen will dry by moonrise. Someone jokes about the size of last year's beets. The silence loosens, but doesn't disappear. You lean against the wall, bowl-empty stomach, full eyelids tugged by heat and gravity. The longhouse glows dimly, amber light painting every soot-blackened beam and wool-wrapped shoulder. There's peace here, not joy, not sorrow, just peace. Researchers continue to explore the emotional landscape of post-raid households, how returning men fit or didn't into the rhythms of home. Some suggest the silence was a kind of scar. Others think it was just the natural hush of winter evenings and tired legs. Either way, it's real, and it sits between spoonfuls. You glance at the hearth god. The butter you offered this morning has melted, pooling at its carved base. It shines faintly. Outside, the wind scratches at the door. Inside, no one moves to answer. The fire spits once as if it has something to say. Then it settles again. Darkness folds around the longhouse like an old blanket, frayed, familiar, full of stories. The fire burns low now, just enough to cast shadows up the beams. You lie on your side beneath thick wool eyes half closed, but the night is far from still. Across the room, hushed voices murmur through the smoke. You know better than to call it gossip. At this hour, it's confession. The grown-ups sit close shoulders, touching voices pitched low, just below, hearing just above silence. Someone chuckles softly. Someone sighs. The rhythm is as old as the hearth. At night, the walls talk. You hear your aunt say, "She likes him." It's not a question. It's a statement hung in the air like a damp tunic. Your grandmother scoffs, "And he's poor as a frost-blighted bean." That apparently settles it. Viking longhouses were not places of privacy. Curtains were rare, whispers carried. Children pretended to sleep while adults traded secrets and schemes. Beds were shared, space was limited. But somehow intimacy thrived, not despite the closeness, but because of it. Your sister is pretending not to listen. Her back turned, her face burning brighter than the coals. You feel a flicker of sympathy and mischief. You tuck your head into the blanket and grin where no one can see. Someone mentions a marriage being arranged. Her dowry's decent, someone says. Decent, comes the reply. It's 2 goats and a song about cheese. That gets a laugh. Not all stories are heavy. You roll onto your other side facing the embers. They pulse gently like a sleeping heartbeat. Behind you, a pair of lovers are exchanging careful glances. Not touching, but not touching. Their hands rest suspiciously close. Your mother clears her throat. The hands move apart, barely. Historians continue to debate the emotional openness of Viking households. Some argue that such public intimacy bred strong bonds, that sharing space meant sharing everything: grief, joy, bad dreams, flatulence. Others claim it led to silent suffering, a kind of resigned closeness that bred tension more than tenderness. There is no agreement, only soot-dark beams and shared breath. A child cries. The sound is brief, muffled. A cradle creaks. A mother hums softly off-key but familiar. You close your eyes, the warmth seeps into your bones. Someone says they dreamt of black feathers. Someone else saw a fox in the village. A third murmurs that their bread didn't rise right this morning, surely a sign. The consensus something's coming, probably. Outside the wind rattles the shutters. A branch scrapes. The fire cracks. Your father shifts in his sleep, muttering a half-word no one understands. The silence afterward is thick like wool soaked in rain. You wonder how many secrets live in this house. Not just love and marriage, but older things. Regret. Longing. The kind of truths you can only say when the fire's low and the night is deep. The shrine god watches from its shelf. Someone whispers a quick blessing, or an apology. Then stillness returns, soft, smoky, and shared. The fire is dying. You curl beneath your blanket shoulder to shoulder, with sleep. All around you the village exhales. The long house so full of voices and clatter, by day sinks into stillness. The embers glow faintly now, just a heartbeat of red in the ash. Every so often a log cracks softly, then settles into silence. You shift a little careful, not to wake your brother, whose arm drapes across your ribs like a forgotten shawl. His breath is warm against your neck. Somewhere near your feet, a cat stretches in her sleep and kneads at your ankle before collapsing again. The air smells like smoke wool and a trace of stew. Your world has shrunk to a shared warmth, a steady breath, and the fire's final flickers. This is how Viking days ended, not with a horn blast or prayer chant, but with tired limbs and soft murmurs, beneath a sagging roof with snow piled high outside, and stories still hanging in the rafters. You think of tomorrow, more flax to card goats to chase firewood to haul. Maybe more dreams of bears or fish that talk. Maybe that girl with the raven hair will smile at you again. Or maybe not. Either way, the day will begin, the same with smoke and cold and the slow stretching of limbs into life. Historians often write about Viking raids, Viking ships, Viking swords. But most Viking days ended here like this, with a body against yours, a blanket that never quite covers your toes, and a fire that needs feeding. The heartbeat of the North wasn't war drums. It was the creak of a straw mattress and the slow rustle of shared sleep. There's something sacred in the stillness, something honest. You listen. Outside, the wind nudges the door again, testing the latch. The cows in the byre shuffle, once then go still. Somewhere a rooster mistakes the darkness for dawn and gives a hopeful little squawk before thinking better of it. You pull the blanket tighter. There's a whisper from the far end of the room. Someone says, "Did you hear that?" Another mumbles back, "It's just the roof settling." Then quiet again. Even whispers feel too loud at this hour. Viking longhouses had no chimneys, just smoke holes, so the air remains thick and warm, flecked with soot. You've lived in it so long, you don't notice anymore. It wraps around you like a second blanket, a little itchy but comforting. Your father snores, a baby whimpers, then quiets. Your sister murmurs a line from a story unfinished. The last of the embers glow, like the eye of a beast too tired to roar. You breathe slowly, in, out. The world contracts. The saga pauses. Tomorrow will bring no conquest, no crowns, just more stew, more spinning, more spilled secrets in the dark. But for now, you are here. And here is enough. The longhouse sleeps, and you at last slip into dream. But not everyone slept. Some rose before the sun to claim quiet kingdoms of their own ones, ruled not with blades, but with bread wool and whispered authority. You arrive quietly just as the sun's gold slips behind the crooked rooftops of a Viking hamlet. Smoke curls from a turf-roofed house where the walls are thick with peat and pride. A woman's silhouette leans over the hearth. She doesn't flinch at the snap of flame or the creak of the wind pressing against the wooden door. This is her domain. And it's no small kingdom. While Viking warriors made legends with axes and voyages, their wives and mothers tended land, ran households, and managed the goods those men sailed for. This was no passive domesticity, it was executive control. In many communities, women took charge of food stores, servant seasonal farming decisions, and even village law when the men left for months or years at a time. One saga tells of Aud the Deep-Minded, a widowed noblewoman who crossed the seas to establish a settlement in Iceland. She chose the land-distributed farms and freed her slaves all as a woman, alone in a patriarchal age. And she wasn't the only one. Many Viking women managed farms and trade networks, legally representing their families and making deals with local chieftains. Some archaeologists argue that this level of autonomy suggests a more balanced power structure than we usually assume. Others caution against romanticizing, pointing out that women's power still hinged on their relationships to men, fathers, husbands, or sons. The truth likely lies somewhere in between, folded into old sagas and hinted at in the keys they wore on their belts. And what keys they were. Not just metal tools, but symbols of command, small emblems of who could lock the storehouse and who held the fate of the winter grain. But before we get to those iron tokens of influence, step a little closer to the fire. There's more to learn about this hearth and the woman who stokes it without ever needing to raise her voice. The key on her belt wasn't just practical, it was political. You notice it first as a small iron shape, half hidden by her apron, swinging slightly as she moves between pots and storage baskets. It jingles when she reaches for a ladle, but listen closer. That sound echoes with quiet authority. In Viking society, the person who held the keys held the household, literally. These weren't just for pantry locks or the strong box. They symbolized access to power. The woman who wore them could ration food, manage the workers, and even grant or deny access to tools, cloth, or ale. She kept the household economy running like a longboat on calm seas. And when her husband was gone, off chasing glory or goring sea serpents, she didn't just hold the fort. She negotiated debts received visitors, and in some cases even mediated village disputes. The key wasn't a mere accessory. It was closer to a badge of office. One grave unearthed in Denmark revealed a woman buried with a ring of keys at her hip, her skeleton curled in what looked like sleep beside scissors beads and a bronze brooch. Some interpret this as evidence of high domestic rank. Others suggest it reflects ritual symbolism or even a kind of spiritual stewardship. After all, to run a home was to manage life itself, births, deaths, trade, and tales. There is no scholarly consensus on how much legal weight Viking women truly wielded. Some medieval laws recognize their right to inherit, sue, and divorce. Others limit them to certain transactions. Researchers continue to debate whether the women buried with keys were heads of household or simply honored for their roles within them. Still, there's something compelling about this image, a woman reaching for a key with the same ease that her husband might reach for his sword. Each object in its own way decided fates. And those keys weren't just metaphorical. Archaeologists have found them forged from iron, bronze, even silver. Some are practical, meant to open chests or doors. Others appear ceremonial, too delicate for real locks, perhaps worn for the message they sent. This home listens to her. A curious detail, many of these keys were paired with scissors in women's graves. Some suggest the scissors symbolized control over cloth and thus trade. Others believe they signaled a woman's role in shaping family literally and symbolically. After all, who cut the cloth, shaped the clothing, the sail, the shroud? You walk through the room again. The woman tends the fire, sets down a bundle of herbs, and lifts a lid from a clay pot. Her key clinks softly as she moves. Somewhere nearby, children sleep under woven blankets. Outside, a goat rustles. Inside, the world bends gently around her. In the Viking world, the sword decided battlefields, but the key decided everything else. And if cloth equals currency, then she might be even more powerful than you think. Ready to step into the loom room next. A faint rustle draws you toward the far side of the house. There, half hidden behind a wool curtain, is the loom room. It smells of lanolin pine and something sharp, maybe lye or crushed madder root. Hanging from pegs are dyed yarns and saffron walnut and storm cloud gray. Threads stretch taut between wooden beams like the strings of an unseen harp. You've entered the unspoken economy of cloth. In the Viking world, textiles were far more than clothing, they were wealth itself. Women spun, wove, and dyed wool, not just for family use, but for trade. Cloth was barter, cloth was dowry, cloth was legacy. Some historians even argue that, in terms of sheer economic influence, Viking women who mastered textiles held more sway than many warriors with axes. Picture a bustling marketplace in Hedeby. Traders haggle over amber furs and soapstone. And in the center, a woman unfurls a bolt of finely woven wool dyed with woad. It's soft but sturdy. Water beads on the surface. The color, a deep blue-gray, is hard to come by. She names her price with a quiet confidence. After all, it took weeks to spin and weave this cloth, and she knows its worth better than any merchant. Textiles were labor-intensive and deeply valued. It could take over a year to produce enough fabric for a single sale, and the women who did this work weren't merely domestic servants. They were craftspeople, chemists, and financiers. One particularly well-preserved woman's grave contained not only weaving tools and dyed wool fragments, but bronze weights suggesting she managed scales and measured trade herself. Researchers continue to debate whether this textile power translated into formal status. Some suggest these women formed guild-like networks or informal cooperatives. Others point to evidence of women controlling large-scale production, especially in settlements near trade routes. But few deny that spinning and weaving gave women both economic leverage and communal respect. And then there's the dyeing process, a murky alchemy of urine vats, fermented roots, and mystery. The colors themselves told stories: rust red for fertility, blue for nobility, green for the middle world. Each hue required knowledge passed down through generations, recipes not written but whispered. A quirky side note: Viking women sometimes dyed yarn with lichens harvested from graveyards, believing it lent protection to the cloth. Superstition or science, no one's sure, but the lichen-dyed cloaks certainly smelled earthy, and perhaps that was half the magic. In stories, Viking men return from raids with silver, but at home, their wives weave gold into cloth quietly, endlessly, defiantly. You can almost hear the click of the loom weights, the low murmur of a lullaby, and the swish of scissors carving fortunes from fabric. One thread becomes a belt, another a curtain, another a story, and one day, perhaps, a sail. You pull back the wool curtain gently. The woman doesn't look up. Her hands move with rhythm, like a priestess at prayer. Outside, someone hammers iron. But in here, value hums from warp and weft. Ready to meet the ant who whispers to bones? It's quieter here. The curtain muffles the clang of iron and the creak of wooden carts outside. In this tucked-away corner of the house, herbs hang from rafters in bundles: yarrow, mugwort, angelica, each with a scent and a secret. At the center of it all sits Aunt Björg, a woman with wiry gray hair and fingers permanently stained green. She hums softly while grinding something in a mortar. You're not sure if it's medicine or a curse. Every Viking settlement had someone like her. She wasn't a priestess nor quite a midwife, but people came to her all the same with stomach aches, night terrors, bad dreams, or worse. She'd pluck a goose feather from the hearthside floor, murmur into it, and place it beneath a child's mattress. Sometimes she boiled herbs, sometimes she burned them. Always she watched the smoke like it told her things no one else could hear. To the untrained eye, she might look like a witch. But that word witch wasn't exactly how her neighbors saw her. She was a vulva, a seeress, or just a respected elder, maybe both. Sometimes feared, often trusted, never ignored. And sometimes, as sagas hint, she was family. The odd aunt who never married kept a raven, and knew when someone was pregnant before they did. One Icelandic saga tells of a woman who traveled from farm to farm during winter, carrying a staff tipped with iron and a sack full of ritual objects. At each stop, villagers hosted her with a special meal. In return, she performed divinations and sang prophetic chants. Scholars still argue whether she was revered or merely tolerated, a relic of older pre-Christian beliefs. The line between healer and sorceress was thin and often deliberately blurred. Viking women might carry a pouch of dried herbs next to a carved bone amulet. Was it for medicine magic or both? Surviving records offer conflicting interpretations, and archaeological evidence suggests a mix of superstition, science, and social role. Here's a peculiar detail. Some witches' staffs found in Viking graves closely resemble distaffs used for spinning wool. This has led to theories that their magical tools evolved from domestic ones, or that the act of spinning itself held ritual significance. After all, threads bind fate in many mythologies, and in Norse belief, even the gods were subject to the weavings of the Norns. Aunt Björg slices dried roots with a curved blade. She blows gently into a bundle of feathers and laughs to herself. You're unsure if she's remembering a joke or casting a charm. There's a chicken in the corner. It hasn't blinked in a while. And yes, someone once swore they saw her whisper to a skull and get an answer. She won't speak much to you, but if you're respectful, she'll hand you a tiny cloth bundle bound in red thread. Inside is something dry, bitter-smelling, and unnameable. You don't ask what it's for. She just says, keep it close when the moon's low, and that's that. Now, let's follow that thread of mystery to a new one carved into wood, wrapped in cloth, and maybe even into the name you carry. The cradle is quiet now, just soft breaths and the occasional creak of wicker. But if you look closely at its rim, you'll see faint marks, tiny carvings smoothed by time and touch. Runes. Not grand stone-hewn runes meant for warriors or kings, but delicate sigils etched by steady hands, often a mother's. Some were names, others were charms. All of them held intention. Runes weren't reserved for the battlefield or the blade. In Viking homes, women carved them onto looms, spoons, distaffs, and doorposts. They were prayers in wood, protection in pine. You might find a love charm folded into linen, or a ward scratched into a bread paddle. These weren't the sweeping gestures of priests or skalds, but quiet rituals of care woven into daily life. One birch bark scroll discovered near Novgorod bears a woman's hand not just in penmanship, but in voice. She wrote instructions, advice, even jokes. A domestic scroll, but also a legacy. Scholars still debate the extent of female literacy in Norse societies. Some claim it was rare, confined to the elite. Others argue that runes, unlike Latin script, belong to everyone, accessible, teachable, passed down like recipes. And teach them they did. A carved spindle whorl from a Swedish dig shows not only decoration, but a runic blessing for smooth thread and safe hands. Who made it? Perhaps a mother for her daughter, or an aunt for a niece about to marry. These charms weren't dramatic. They were whispered insurance policies against life's fraying edge. Researchers continue to explore the overlap between female artisanship and spiritual practice. Some believe women were the primary keepers of everyday magic, not just in herbs and chants, but in the very objects that shaped a household. If a warrior's sword bore his fate, a woman's spoon held hers. One carved blessing read, May she stir peace and sweetness into all who dine. That spoon was buried with its owner. Perhaps it fed a dozen mouths, soothed the ill, or stirred something sacred on solstice nights. A simple tool, yes, but also a spell in disguise. A quirky find from Gotland, a child's wooden rattle carved with the rune algae's symbol of protection, tucked into a cradle with a length of red wool. Maybe the child cried too much. Maybe she was born under a troubled moon. Or maybe someone, likely her mother, just wanted to be sure that whatever lingered in the dark kept its distance. Some sagas tell of rune masters, those trained in the deep meanings of symbols. Most were men. But that doesn't mean women lacked fluency. They just used it differently, subtly, intimately, in ways that didn't shout but sang. You run your fingers over one of the cradle's runes. The groove is shallow worn, but it still holds its shape. Like a lullaby you almost remember, and as the fire cracks in the hearth behind you, you realize she didn't just carve names. She carved warnings, blessings, and perhaps a little bit of herself. Time to step into the room where those names might first be spoken during birth, and the blood-inked rituals that welcome new life. The birthing room is warm, almost too warm. Braziers flicker low, the air heavy with herbs, juniper, mugwort, something sharper. A basin steams in the corner. Beneath it lies a goat's skull, carefully tucked among moss and stone. The midwife leans over a bundle of cloth, her hands steady and stained. Birth here is no quiet miracle. It is ceremony endurance, and perhaps a little sorcery. In Viking culture, childbirth wasn't only a biological event, it was a rite of passage wrapped in salt blood and breath. Women gathered not just to assist, but to witness, chant, and protect. The room would be sealed from men, not just for modesty, but to preserve the strange sacred threshold the mother hovered upon, between life and death, this world and the next. A goat's blood ritual sometimes marked the birth, especially in older traditions. The blood dripped across the threshold, or onto stone, symbolized protection and new beginnings. Some midwives would smear a dab on the newborn's brow. Not all births included it, and scholars still dispute whether it was religious superstitious or simply symbolic. The details, like the blood, are blurry. One Norse poem hints at the ritual invocation of female deities, protectors of the womb, guardians of infants. These figures were called upon, with chants whispered between contractions. Salt was sprinkled in the corners, believed to ward off wandering spirits or ill intentions. A candle, sometimes made with animal fat and wrapped in red thread, would burn low beside the birthing stool. Some archaeological finds suggest that birth tools were buried with older midwives, carved spoons, iron scissors, stone amulets, and herbs bound in linen. One grave even included a small wooden doll, perhaps a charm for fertility, or a token of gratitude from a long-forgotten family. There is no scholarly consensus on the precise role of Viking midwives, but their presence in both lore and graves points to power cloaked in care. The birthing chair itself, sturdy three-legged, often handed down through generations, was considered sacred. Women would grip its carved arms during labor, sometimes biting down on leather straps. Pain was part of the process, but so was control. In some regions, women chose their midwife and birth location, asserting agency even when the gods seemed inattentive. A curious tradition, a woman's knife used during childbirth to cut cord and cloth was often blessed beforehand, sometimes with a carved rune, sometimes with spit and a prayer. These knives were passed on like heirlooms, dulled by time, but rich with memory. One such blade found buried near Bergen bears tiny marks along its edge, perhaps counting births, or losses. The newborn is washed, swaddled in wool, and given their name often spoken 3 times to seal it. A tiny charm is pinned to the cloth, a tooth, a feather, a shell. The midwife hums as she works. Outside, snow has begun to fall. You step back from the room. The air has shifted. Life has entered quietly. And when the mother sleeps, her knife will go back to its apron next to the keys next to the spoons. And when her husband returns from sea, she'll hand him his child and say nothing of the goat. The longhouse door creaks open, not with a burst of triumph, but the cold draft of return. A man stands in the doorway, travel-worn and sea-bitten. But it's the woman who greets him with a nod, not a curtsy. Her apron holds a knife, her belt still clinks with keys. She has managed the land, the household, and the debts in his absence. And if he's expecting a demure welcome, well, he might find himself sleeping in the storage loft. Viking widows especially held surprising power. When their husbands died, whether in battle at sea or from a poorly timed goat encounter, they often retained control of the estate. Some sold land, others expanded it. Many became traders, lenders, even heads of extended households. Their legal rights varied by region and era, but sagas and law codes both point to one fact: a widow was not necessarily a woman to pity. Take the case of Thorgerd Egilsdottir. After her husband's death, she not only held his estate, but negotiated marriages, managed finances, and out-argued her sons on major decisions. In some records, widows are even shown initiating lawsuits. One court document describes a woman suing her neighbor for grazing rights and winning twice. The boundary dispute. A single goat path between two farms. Viking petty litigation was apparently alive and well. Researchers continue to debate just how widespread this legal authority was. Some argue that only elite women enjoyed such freedoms. Others point to the sheer number of grave goods and inscriptions, hinting at widespread economic agency. There's no uniform answer, but the trend is clear. Widowhood did not mean retreat. A curious fact: several runestones in Sweden were commissioned not by men, but by widows in memory of their husbands. These weren't just mourning markers, they were public declarations of wealth status and continuity. One inscription reads, "Gyda raised this stone for Thorald, who gave her land and kindness. She holds his hall now." And then there's trade. Viking widows frequently stepped into their husbands' merchant roles, selling wool, honey, ale, and livestock. One woman, known only as Hildur, is recorded as owning part of a harbor market in the 10th century. Her name appears in the records alongside merchant guilds. Was she an anomaly, or simply one of many whose paperwork survived? Even more intriguing, some widows didn't just preserve their husbands' networks, they improved them. By the time the warrior's bones returned home, if they did, she might have doubled the storehouse and negotiated a better grain rate with the next village over. One amusing saga tale tells of a widow who fended off a suitor by pretending to be a ghost. She wore her husband's old helmet, covered herself in flour, and screamed in Old Norse until he ran screaming. Whether true or not, it suggests a cultural fondness for clever women and a sharp sense of humor in the grieving process. The man in the doorway drops his pack. The woman nods once, then returns to her ledger. She'll speak to him after she finishes counting the barley. And if he's lucky, there's still ale left in the cellar. The scent hits you before anything else, yeasty sharp, a little sweet, a little sour. Somewhere nearby, a fire crackles under a copper kettle. Steam billows as a wooden paddle stirs its contents. This isn't a tavern or a feast. It's her brewery. And she's been running it longer than most men can keep their shields upright. Viking women didn't just brew ale, they controlled it. Brewing was a domestic task, yes, but one with social, spiritual, and economic weight. Ale was a staple consumed daily, often safer than water, which meant that the woman who brewed the ale sustained not just the home, but the village. In many Norse households, ale was brewed weekly in small batches, and recipes were closely guarded. Ingredients included barley water and bittering herbs like bog myrtle or juniper. Hops were rare. Some brews included honey, making them closer to mead. The taste scholars suggest a lightly fermented sour profile, more porridge than Pilsner. Ales weren't just for drinking. They played a central role in rituals, weddings, funerals, harvest festivals, and oath ceremonies, which meant the brewer wasn't just a cook. She was a ritual provider, a kind of priestess with a paddle. One rune-inscribed ladle discovered in Norway bears a carved blessing. May your ale never sour, nor your hearth go cold. It was likely passed down between generations, its handle worn smooth by centuries of stirring. There's scholarly debate over whether brewing women held formal status. Some believe they acted as guild leaders or community suppliers. Others suggest their power was informal, rooted in necessity rather than law. But records from later medieval Scandinavia show fines imposed on men who attempted to sell ale without a woman's oversight, a curious legal echo from earlier traditions. And then there's the fermentation process itself, a mysterious alchemy. Viking women used sourdough-like starters called kveik yeast strains that survived in wood and cloth. They dip bundles of sticks into old brews to seed new ones. Some even sang to the bubbling ale soft chants thought to soothe the spirit within the brew. A delightful oddity one preserved brewing room includes carvings of smiling faces near the vats. Were they fertility symbols, or just a brewer's inside joke? Historians remain unsure, but the figures suggest that ale-making was a space of warmth, humor, and a little superstition. The matriarch wipes her hands on her apron, lifts the lid, and inhales. Then she turns to you, offering a wooden cup with a crooked smile. It's warm, slightly sour, and surprisingly strong. You feel it settle in your belly like a hearth fire. This is her currency, her craft, her command. She doesn't shout. She doesn't duel. But she can cut off the village's ale supply with a single shrug. And when winter grows long and tempers short, she is the one who decides whether peace is toasted or tested. Ready to leave the warmth for the waiting shore, where another kind of strength is measured in silence. You step outside, breath frosting in the salt-kissed air. The sea murmurs beyond the hill, its rhythm as familiar as a heartbeat. Along the shore, figures stand still, and small women wrapped in woolen cloaks, eyes fixed on the horizon. They are sea wives, and their power lies not in sailing, but in waiting. Waiting here is not idle. It's a discipline, a ritual, and sometimes a quiet rebellion. When husbands and sons vanish into the waves for weeks or whole seasons, these women keep the hearth alive. The fields tended, the children bathed and fed. They listen to gulls for signs. They watch the clouds for omens. They speak Njord's name in whispers. Njord, the Norse god of the sea, was often invoked by sailors, but his prayers were spoken just as often by the women on land. Some lit small oil lamps at dusk, floating them in bowls of water as offerings. Others hung bits of driftwood by the door, each piece carved with a rune for protection or return. One saga tells of a woman who knotted her husband's scarf 7 times before his departure, whispering a different charm into each knot. She wore it until he returned, or until it unraveled. He came back, the story says, just as the last knot loosened. A coincidence some believe. Others suggest these rituals were the only tools women had to grasp the chaos of the sea. There's little scholarly agreement on the daily emotional toll of this waiting. Sagas tend to gloss over it, focusing instead on the men's journeys. But surviving letters, court records, and folk songs hint at longing resentment, endurance, and sometimes liberation. One woman wrote, "He leaves with the spring, I dance with the grain," and sometimes they didn't wait. Archaeological finds suggest that women occasionally took to trade themselves, managing ships, transporting goods, even leading expeditions. A grave in Kaupang contained a woman buried with scales foreign coins and a long-distance trade ledger carved into wood. Perhaps she waited once, and then decided not to. Still, for most, the waiting continued, and with it, a subtle shift in authority. While the men chased raids and riches, the women grew into decision makers. They sold surplus goods, forged alliances, and even handled marriages. Their homes didn't pause, they evolved. One curious tradition: women would sometimes leave boots outside the door, pointed seaward, a sign, some say, to welcome the returning husband. Others believe it was symbolic, a message to the gods, or perhaps a warning. This path is already watched. At dusk, the shoreline flickers with torchlight. A woman wraps her shawl tighter, staring at a dark speck far out on the water. Is it a sail? A seabird? Her face reveals nothing. Waiting is not passive here. It is work. It is will. And when the longboat finally appears and warriors return sunburnt and boasting, they may find their children taller, their homes altered, and their wives a little more inscrutable than before. Now step inside again. Someone has a story to tell, and the woman telling it knows the ending better than any skald. The fire crackles low again, casting long shadows across the hall walls, shadows that flicker like memories. A group of children sit cross-legged on woven mats, eyes wide, breath hushed. At the center, an older woman settles in her voice, calm but clear. Tonight she's the skald, but her sagas aren't sung for kings. They're passed down like lullabies, gentle, sharp, and stitched with truth. In Viking culture, storytelling wasn't just entertainment, it was preservation. The oral tradition was the anchor of memory, especially in homes where scrolls were rare and winter long. And though male skalds filled courtrooms and mead halls with epic tales, it was often women who kept the quieter stories alive. Birth tales, ghost warnings, love losses, and the secrets of family lineages. Some scholars believe women served as memory keepers for clans. They taught children the names of ancestors, the meanings of runes, the signs of the stars. Their stories guided decisions: when to plant, whom to trust, how to prepare for the wind. And while some tales honored gods and warriors, others warned of foolish merchants or proud daughters who outwitted death. There's ongoing debate about the gender divide in Norse storytelling. Written records preserved mostly by monks emphasize male bards. But the domestic artifacts, spindle whorls etched with saga fragments, bone combs engraved with riddles, suggest that women's voices carried stories too, just in different spaces. A peculiar find from a farmhouse in central Norway, a child's wooden toy carved with a wolf chasing a ship. Along the rim was scratched a phrase, "Don't forget the tale of the night sailor." No manuscript records this tale. It may have lived only in kitchens and cradles, but someone, likely a mother, made sure it lived. And not all stories softened over time. Some women told of blood feuds, of betrayals, of births gone wrong. Their tone might lull, but their words sliced with purpose. These were not just fairy tales, they were instruction manuals in disguise. A joke might end with a proverb. A bedtime tale might carry a warning. There's a curious charm in the dual nature of their narratives. Women told stories that soothed children to sleep and warned them never to walk near the frozen lake at dusk. They spun yarn and yarns at once. One saga fragment hints at a woman who trained her daughter in both runes and riddles. She kept 2 looms, the line reads, one for cloth, one for lies. Scholars aren't sure whether the phrase is affectionate or accusatory, maybe both. You glance at the children again. One leans against the storyteller's leg, eyelids heavy. Another mimics her gestures, mouthing the words. This isn't performance, it's inheritance. And when the children grow, they'll carry these stories forward. Maybe not exactly as told, but close enough. The names may change, the gods may fade, but the lesson always remains. Now, come sit closer. Marriage looms ahead, and with it the mother's bargaining voice, the daughter's uncertain smile, and the quiet strategic power exchanged beneath the feasting table. The feast has ended, but the negotiations have just begun. Candles gutter low. Platters are empty save for a few stubborn bones. At the far end of the hall, two mothers lean in over a woven cloth. One speaks in measured tones, the other replies with a shrug and a sideways glance. Between them, a girl with braids too neat to be comfortable sits still. Tonight, her dowry is being weighed not just in silver, but in strategy. In Viking culture, marriage wasn't a private romance. It was an alliance. A daughter's dowry landcloth livestock wasn't simply given away. It was a calculated gift meant to bind families, strengthen trade, or settle old disputes. And behind each dowry stood a mother, often the quiet negotiator, in a room full of posturing men. Fathers may have had the final say, but mothers knew the terrain, which cousin drank too much, which groom had debts, which farm flooded every spring. They brought this knowledge to the table in subtle ways. Offhand remarks, changes in embroidery patterns, a carefully timed silence. There's no consensus among historians on how much control Viking women had in arranging their daughters' futures. Legal texts from medieval Scandinavia suggest girls could object to a match, but were rarely given full autonomy. Yet, sagas tell a different story. In some, daughters choose their suitors, delay marriages, or even elope. In others, mothers manipulate outcomes behind the scenes, pretending neutrality while nudging fate like a spindle. One saga tells of a woman named Asa who, displeased with her daughter's suitor, hosted a feast so poorly the groom took it as an omen and withdrew. She served burnt bread over salted fish and laid the table backwards. Her excuse: the dog got into the salt. Her daughter married someone else 2 moons later. Another curious practice, the dowry chest. Mothers filled it not just with material goods, but with heirlooms and symbolic items, a spindle from a grandmother, herbs tied in red thread, a spoon carved with the bride's rune. These weren't just practical, they were stories encoded in objects, each telling the groom she comes with history. And sometimes a mother's bargain extended beyond marriage. Some dowries included terms grazing rights, visiting arrangements, even oaths of kindness. A marriage, after all, was also a treaty. Researchers debate how often these terms were enforced, but the presence of contracts, some signed with marks rather than names, suggests that women understood the fine print, and were not afraid to write it. A quirky anecdote, one preserved letter from a mother to her married daughter, includes the line, "If he shouts, throw this at him." Enclosed was a stone carved with a rune for silence. The tone is unclear. Protective, humorous, practical. Possibly all three. You look again at the girl between the mothers. She adjusts her braid, exhales slowly, and stands. A decision has been reached. But don't worry, we won't follow her just yet. Step outside the hall first. See where the boundary of her new world begins, and where a fence might mean more than just wood. The fence isn't tall, just a low barrier of wood posts and woven branches, weather-worn and half-swallowed by grass. You might mistake it for decoration, but in a Viking household, this house fence marked more than land, it marked power. Step inside it, and you're in her realm. Step outside, and the rules change. Viking gender roles weren't enforced with laws so much as with space. The yard or ton around a house formed a boundary, not just for livestock or children, but for social authority. Within it, the woman of the house held sway. She managed food tools, servants, and often justice. Beyond it into the fields, the woods the longshipmen took over. This spatial division wasn't rigid, but it was respected. Even disputes followed its logic. One law code implies that insulting a woman inside her ton was more severe than doing so in a public hall. It was her domain, her stage, her battlefield. A curious detail from excavation sites, archaeologists have found small charms buried beneath fence posts, bone fragments carved stones, and once a tiny iron key. Were they protection spells, house blessings, or simple forgetfulness by someone in a hurry? No one knows. But their placement always at thresholds suggests intent. Scholars continue to explore the symbolic weight of these domestic boundaries. Some argue they were subtle reins of power, allowing women to operate with autonomy within designated space. Others suggest they were limitations disguised as privileges. The truth likely lies, as always, in between. One saga tells of a woman named Ranveig who dragged her feuding brothers back inside the tun before declaring judgment. Here, she said, you listen. Out there you shout. She settled the matter with a single glance. It's unclear whether it worked because of her wisdom or because of where she stood. And the fence worked both ways. It wasn't just protection for women, it was protection from them. Cross the wrong threshold, speak the wrong words, and you might find yourself cursed, banished, or quietly disinvited from every feast that season. A quirky bit of folklore, women sometimes swept their thresholds with specific brooms on holy days, not to clean, but to reset the energy of the household. If someone stepped over the broom before it was done, it was considered unlucky. Or, in some tales, it meant that guests would end up married to someone in the house. Coincidence? Likely. But superstition thrives in spaces where power is invisible. And yet there are moments when the fence fades. During harvest sickness or siege rolls blur. Everyone hauls feeds guards. But when things settle again, so do the borders. You watch the woman as she ties herbs to dry under the eaves. She glances toward the fields, but stays within the yard. Her knife flashes briefly as she trims a stem. Her feet never cross the line. Inside this fence, she rules quietly. Outside, she watches. Now, come closer. There's something else in that apron, not a charm, not a spoon, something sharper. It doesn't gleam. It's not adorned with jewels or dragon heads. But the knife in her apron is unmistakable, short, slightly curved, its handle darkened by time and touch. She uses it now to slice dried apples, but tomorrow she might trim wool gutfish or cut a cord from a newborn. And if need be, she could press it to a throat. Viking women didn't go to sea with broadswords, but they carried blades, small ones, practical ones, sacred ones. Tucked into belts or aprons, they were tools first. But tools have a way of becoming something more, especially when they're used in life's most intimate and urgent moments. Knives were essential to daily life food prep craft, childbirth, even burial rites. Women's knives show up often in graves alongside spindle whorls and beads. Some were plain iron. Others had carved bone handles or small rune markings. One was found in a linen pouch with a bit of dried blood, and a smooth stone, perhaps a whetstone, or perhaps something else. Historians continue to argue whether these knives serve ceremonial purposes. Some believe they were extensions of domestic labor. Others see them as protective charms passed down like blessings. There's no consensus, but there are patterns. One saga tells of a woman who pricked her finger each time she made a marriage blanket, whispering a wish into the blood. Another recounts a widow who fended off a would-be thief with a kitchen blade, then used it to carve a warning into her doorframe. The warning, I stitch the wound. Do not make me open it again. And then there's the matter of childbirth. Midwives often carried specialized knives kept sharper than kitchen blades and anointed with herbs or fat. One preserved blade shows faint carvings, possibly a charm for safe delivery. When life hung in the balance, these knives were both mercy and necessity. A peculiar find from a Swedish dig, a woman's knife buried beside a baby's toy and a broken spoon. Some say she died in childbirth. Others think the items were symbolic, a mother's legacy bundled in sorrow. Whatever the story, her blade rests across her chest, as if to say, I took care. I defended. I acted. And let's not forget the domestic fights. Disputes over land goats or even sour ale could turn nasty. One court record describes a woman nicking her neighbor's ear during a feud about washing stones. The fine 2 sheep and an apology. The outcome. She kept the stones. You watch the woman now as she slides the knife back into its sheath. Her face is unreadable, her movements precise. The blade disappears beneath her apron fold, but you know it's there, silent, sharp, and ready. Not all weapons are carried into battle. Some are carried into kitchens, onto birthing stools, into fields and feast halls. Some are meant to cut bread. Some are meant to remind others you are not to be underestimated. Now, let's follow that blade into the quiet of the grave, where what she carried tells us who she was, or might have been. The grave is shallow, tucked beneath a wind-worn mound where the grass grows thick and stubborn. A low stone ring marks the border. At first glance, it's unremarkable. No towering rune stone, no buried hoard of silver. But then you look closer. A comb carved from bone. A brooch cracked but elegant. A pair of scissors. And something small and rusted, maybe a spoon. These are her grave goods, and they tell a story that may never be fully read. Viking graves are more than resting places. They're time capsules, puzzles, messages for the future, scrawled in objects instead of words. For women especially, the contents of a burial often reflect the roles they held or were believed to hold. Domestic tools, jewelry, amulets, and occasionally oddities like iron tongs or animal bones appear in patterns that hint at lives both ordinary and extraordinary. But here's the tricky part: interpretation. Was the woman buried with a distaff because she spun wool, or because spinning symbolized femininity? Were scissors tokens of trade or symbols of a spiritual role? Archaeologists debate these meanings constantly. One camp argues for literal readings. She was a weaver, she was a cook. Others point to symbolism tools as metaphors for status rituals or identity. There's no scholarly consensus, and yet the questions persist. A particularly enigmatic find comes from Oseberg, Norway, a richly furnished ship burial, likely for 2 women. Among the many items, tapestries, carts, imported silks, was a shallow box filled with combs, tweezers, and a strange hooked rod. Some believe these women were priestesses or volur high-ranking figures in society. Others think they were nobility, or both. The items themselves don't answer clearly, they whisper, suggest, deflect. One quirky example: a grave in Gotland contained a woman buried with iron cooking tools and a falcon feather. The tools suggest domestic labor, the feather perhaps ritual. Did she cook for warriors or bless them? A comb might mean vanity or hygiene, or it might be part of a ritual cleansing passed through someone's hair before a funeral. A brooch might signal wealth, or simply that it was the nicest thing she owned. The ambiguity is maddening, poetic, and eternal. Some graves include items clearly intended for the afterlife: food bundles, fire, starters, even boots. Others seem more symbolic: a child's tooth, a coin, a bead wrapped in linen. These hint at personal stories we'll never know. A lost daughter, a favorite necklace, a quiet superstition. Researchers still puzzle over why some women were buried with weapons, short knives, even small axes. Were they meant for defense in the next life, or trophies of a life lived with unspoken authority? You kneel beside the grave, letting your hand hover above the artifacts. You can't touch, but you can imagine. A life condensed into objects, each one chosen by someone who loved or feared her. She did not write a saga, but her scissors are here, her spoon, her rusted key. And long after her name is forgotten, the meaning of those things still shifts, still haunts, still asks. Do you understand what she meant, and what exactly did she want remembered? Let's follow one final thread, soft woven and pass through time to where legacy lingers quietly in the loom. The loom creaks gently in the corner. Its frame is sturdy, worn smooth by generations of hands. Threads stretch from beam to beam, some taut, some curling loose like memories. A half-woven cloth hangs in place, undyed wool, with hints of saffron and pale green. You can almost see the imprint of the last hand that touched it. This isn't just weaving, this is legacy. In Viking households, cloth was more than warmth or trade. It was inheritance. Heirlooms weren't only swords and rings, they were cloaks, curtains swaddling wraps. A mother's weaving lived on, not in stone or saga, but in the warp and weft of daily life. To wear her work was to remember her. To sleep beneath her blanket was to feel her strength. Some textiles survive generations. There are stories half recorded, half whispered of cloaks passed down through 4 or 5 daughters. Each one added her own repair, her own stitch of color, until the cloak was a patchwork of ancestry and artistry. It wasn't beautiful by modern standards, but it was sacred. A rare textile fragment from Birka, preserved in Pete Bear's faint embroidery, just a few threads of indigo looping around a tear. Scholars argue whether it was decorative or practical, but one stitch shaped like a small rune suggests intention. Maybe a charm, maybe a signature, maybe both. And that's the curious thing about legacy, it's not always clear. Some mothers wove for beauty, others for survival, still others for memory. Their threads might warm a child or cover a corpse. One blanket could serve a wedding night, then a winter death. Some historians believe women wove their identities into these items, symbols, patterns, even scent. A wool tunic might carry the trace of juniper smoke, or the oil from a certain herb. These small details became part of the story, remembered in whispers. That was her shawl, the one she wore when the goat kicked the bishop. This apron still smells like her kitchen. There's no scholarly consensus on whether Viking women thought of themselves as creators of legacy, but the evidence is threaded through grave sites, household records, and oral tales. A loom weight engraved with a name, a spindle whorl shaped like a crescent moon, a child's burial wrapped in a clearly adult-sized cloak folded with care, a quirky tradition from coastal villages. When a woman died, her loom was dismantled by her daughters. Each daughter took one beam. If none remained, the pieces were burned in a quiet fire. This was said to prevent the dead from weaving in the afterlife and pulling living souls into their threads. Protective reverent, or just a way to make sure no one touched the tension she left behind. You step closer to the loom. The unfinished cloth lifts slightly in the draft. You can see where one thread split and was gently knotted back together. Not every legacy is loud. Some are worn, some are buried, some are simply remembered. Let's rest here now among the fibers of memory. The hearth is low, the wind has stilled, and all her stories have been told. The fire crackles slower now. Outside, the moon slips behind the clouds, and the longhouse is quiet, just wool on wood and the distant sigh of sea wind. You've wandered through rooms held together by herbs and salt, by stories and stitches, by women who didn't need swords to shape the world. Let those images linger, a spoon with a secret, a cradle carved with runes, a knife beside a bowl of apples. Threads that pass from hand to hand, silent but strong. All of them reminders that power doesn't always shout. Sometimes it sows. If your eyes are still open, let them soften. If your thoughts are still busy, let them unravel. And if this story helped you drift even a little well, that's a kind of magic too. Still awake. Maybe leave a sleepy emoji, and tell me where you're listening from and what time it is there. Also, who or what should we explore next?